Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme, the Oscar-winning actor, indeed this year's Oscar-winning actor, Colin Firth, will be with us. We'll be looking at the troubled Eurozone economy, and I'll be talking to the Foreign Minister of the honeymoon capital of the world. But first, Palestine. Next week's United Nations General Assembly will be asked to vote on the Palestinian initiative for UN recognition of their state and full membership of the UN. The US might veto, probably will, they say, the plan. But what impact will such a vote have, and what are the potential ramifications? Well, to discuss that, I'm joined now by the former Palestinian Authority's Foreign Minister, Dr. Nabil Shath from Ramallah. Dr. Shath, Nabil, thank you for joining us right now. Let me ask a very...
Thank you.
It's good to have you with us. Basic question. When we get to the vote at the United Nations General Assembly, by a huge majority, the vote is voted, perhaps 160, 170, anyway, tremendous number of votes in favour of the Palestinian Authority being a UN state. Then it goes to the Security Council, where it is vetoed by the United States, bewildering the United States, but anyway, the United States for some reason, and at that stage, a veto from the Security Council, what happens next?
Well, the decision by the General Assembly will award us immediately what is called a non-member state, or now the pseudonym for it is the Vatican status, because the Vatican still holds that kind of status. It is a little bit short of a full member of the United Nations, but it allows us to go to all the allied United Nations organizations and conferences and join them as a full member. We can become immediately a member of the UNESCO, of the International Criminal Court, of the International Monetary Fund and other organizations. And we will continue to knock on the door of the Security Council. There is no limitation as to the number of times we could go back to the Security Council to ask for a full membership.
And there's no limitation on how many times they can say no, unfortunately, as well, in terms of the basic thing. But in terms of going ahead, as you've outlined, what does that do to the PLO, who had a similar status on behalf of Palestine? You can't have two sole representatives. What happens to the PLO? Do they lose their status?
Well, the PLO itself has recognized, in fact declared, the state of Palestine in the Palestine National Congress, which is the parliament of the PLO, in 1988. And so the state of Palestine was really established, declared by the PLO. We are not declaring it again. There was 84 countries that immediately recognized the state that the PLO declared back in 1988. And now we have increased that number from 84 to some 128 by my counting today. But the number will increase definitely during the next few days or few weeks. And we are taking all of these recognitions and all of this status to the United Nations for membership. And therefore the PLO remains the basic organization that determines the structure of the state, the policy of the state, the goals, the objectives, the targets, the campaigns. So the PLO remains within the Palestinian ranks the highest authority. But vis-à-vis the world, it's the PLO's creation that represents the Palestinians, which is the state, which is the highest level of representation any people could have.
But at the same time, you can't have two sole representatives, can you? You can't have the PLO as the non-member state and the Palestinian Authority as the non-member state. Nobody's going to vote for two.
No, 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 no. We are not asking anybody to recognize the Palestine National Authority. The Palestine National Authority is an interim government of the West Bank and Gaza. It is not the state of all the Palestinians. And we're not going to ask for two recognitions, one for the PLO and one the state of Palestine. That has finished with in 1988. Since 1988, we don't have in the United Nations an office of the PLO. We have a representative of Palestine. And now that Palestine has been recognized by almost everybody as the representative of the Palestinians. But the PLO remains behind the state as the real Palestinian Authority. The world will be talking to the state.
But if someone says, I want to talk to Palestine at the UN, does the person who answers the phone, is he from the Palestinian Authority or is he from the separate PLO? Who takes the call?
No, no, the Palestinian Authority is not represented anywhere. In fact, all our negotiations with the Israelis were in the name of the PLO to the benefit of the Palestinian Authority. When we signed agreements with the United States or with Europe or with Japan giving aid to the Palestinian Authority, it was the PLO who negotiated that, and to the benefit of the PLO, the PNA. So we don't have a problem between the PNA and the PLO.
But who are you voting for in the General Assembly then? Are you voting for a non-member state for the PLO, which would make no sense really, because you've got that already, or a second non-member state for the Palestinian Authority? Who are we voting for there?
We will be voting, everybody will be asked by the PLO to vote for the state. And from that moment on, it is the state of Palestine which will represent the PLO, but which will represent every Palestinian, inside and outside. It will also represent the PNA. It will also represent the totality of the Palestinian existence.
I see. So that, in fact, if all of this happens and these votes go ahead, the situation is that the Palestinian Authority will be senior to the PLO, or the PLO at the UN will be senior to the Palestinian Authority. I'm not sure which is going to be senior.
There will be no PLO in the United Nations.
Right.
It is now going to be the state of Palestine that represents the Palestinians. And when the PLO needs, the PNA needs anything, it will go to the state again. And the state of Palestine will be negotiating on behalf of the PNA.
Thank you very much indeed, Nabil. I think we've outlined the basic shape of what's going to happen in the days ahead, and we hope for a strong and peaceful outcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
The Palestinian bid for statehood at the UN is causing reverberations around the world, and not everyone welcomes it. Israeli historian Benny Morris describes the Palestinian Authority's plans for official recognition by the UN as an assault that will result in waves of Palestinian violence. The professor of history at Ben Gurion University is no stranger to controversy. Sometimes denounced, for instance, as an anti-Semite or a PLO lover by the right, Morris has always proclaimed himself a Zionist, another emotive word. He joins me now from Jerusalem to discuss his view that the UN bid is a rejection of all efforts for a peaceful compromise. Benny, welcome to the program. Let me ask you first, I mean, what do you think will emerge, what will have happened by the end of the UN meetings on this subject? Will statehood be any closer? Will there be no progress at all, or will it be negative?
I think it'll be negative, but it might bring Palestinian statehood closer. I'm all for Palestinian statehood and for a two-state solution. A Jewish state side by side with a Palestinian Arab state. This is, I think, what most reasonable people want. The problem is that it should really be reached through negotiations and not unilaterally by the Palestinians and their supporters around the world. The problem is, from the Palestinian perspective, they will be getting a state, or what they think will be a state, without paying the price of recognition of Israel as a Jewish state. And this is the problem.
Yes, why is that so important? Because it's palpably clear that Israel is a Jewish state, and I mean, no one doubts that for a second. Isn't it absolutely meaningless to say it's important to call it a Jewish state? We know it's a Jewish state. What's the saying it? What difference does it make?
Well, the Palestinian Authority leader, Mahmoud Abbas, has repeatedly said over the past year or two that he will not accept or recognize Israel as a Jewish state. And this leaves open the possibility that down the road, the small Palestinian state emerging in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip will, in a second stage, try to expand and overthrow and destroy the Jewish state. Were he to accept Israel as a Jewish state, this would assure Israelis that he has no such second stage in mind.
But I mean, that's a small point compared to the number of things that Israel needs to reassure the Palestinians of in terms of their aggression. This just seems to be a small step. And as you say, it's academic, that point, because you say it may only happen in a future situation. And it just seems an academic point that's an unnecessary barrier. But you think it's a necessary barrier.
No, I don't think it's academic. I think it touches to the heart of the problem. The problem is that the Arab world and the Muslim world generally do not accept the legitimacy of Zionism or of Jewish statehood. And so long as this is true, there will be no two-state settlement and there will not be a compromise. They must accept Israel's existence and its Jewish character as part of a deal in which they will receive a Palestinian state. So long as this legitimacy is not granted, the road is open to further conflict, even if the Palestinians do receive a small state in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It will just be a basis for further conflict and further attack to eventually rid the region of a Jewish state.
Yes, I just don't see how one sentence changes that. But do you expect another intifada after this situation? After these meetings?
That I don't know. I don't know. My assumption is that with the Middle East in turmoil, continuous upheaval and turmoil, it's unlikely that the Palestinians will resist steps on the ground which will lead to violence. Mass demonstrations, mass protests, attempts to break into settlements, to break through the fence which more or less separates Israel from the West Bank. All these things are likely and will lead to violence, and maybe even, as you put it, a third intifada.
Right, but
and a third intifada will not bring peace closer.
How far away do you think peace is? You said one or two things where you're implying you don't think there'll be peace but in this two-state solution. There won't be peace in your lifetime. Is that what you still feel, Benny?
Unfortunately, that's what I feel. I think a two-state solution is the only reasonable and just solution to the Israel-Palestine problem. I don't think the Palestinians really want it. The Hamas, which controls much of the population, says it doesn't want Israel to exist, it wants to destroy Israel. The PLO, which controls the West Bank more or less, says it wants to establish a state in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, but the rest of the territory of Palestine is open to further political and military whatever. So I don't think the Palestinians really want a two-state solution. They want all of Palestine, as they traditionally have wanted it. And this is the problem. Israeli settlements are another problem, but the minor problem in this equation.
Yeah, Israel. Well, I mean, surely the Israeli settlements are a much bigger problem. I mean, they're both the original underlying principle, or some would say lack of principle, of building them in the first place. But I mean, they are the major problem in the situation, I would say, and certainly Palestinian people would say, and people in general at the UN, that the settlements are by far the worst, most jagged factor in this negotiation.
No, I wouldn't agree to that. I think there were Israeli settlements, you may recall, in the Gaza Strip. These were more or less immediately, abruptly uprooted by Israel's Prime Minister Ariel Sharon in 2005. There was no mass protests on the Israeli side. There was no problem. The settlements vanished. And the same more or less could occur to many of the settlements in the West Bank were Israelis persuaded that the Arabs intend peace. The problem is the Arabs haven't persuaded the Israelis they really want peace. The Israelis are persuaded, on the contrary, that the Arabs want to simply destroy them. And I think that mindset on the Arab side, that Israel is illegitimate and shouldn't exist, this remains the basic problem. The settlements are a problem. They are an obstacle to peace. They should, most of them, be uprooted in a peace agreement, but they are not the major obstacle. The Arab mindset is the problem.
Benny, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Many thanks.
Well, the UN sessions haven't started yet, but the European finance ministers are meeting today in Poland to discuss the plight of the euro. In a mark of how serious the crisis is, they're joined by the US Treasury Secretary, a rare visitor to these meetings, very rare indeed, Timothy Geithner. The hosts, Poland, are ratcheting up the pressure. Their finance minister told the European Parliament this week that Europe is in danger. If the euro area breaks up, the European Union will not be able to survive. So, is he right? Well, I'm joined now by the head of the European movement in the UK and a Greek economist to boot, Petros Fasoulas. Welcome back, Petros. Well, let's start with that question. Where do you start with the problem? Well, the problem of the euro, or does your thought start with the problem of just Greece?
I think we have to separate the two. The current crisis is one of excessive debt in certain parts of the Eurozone, which amount to about 6% of GDP, so a very small percentage. The euro as a whole, as a single currency, remains strong. It has the confidence of the markets. It is almost a second reserve currency, and it includes some of the strongest economies. But there are certain structural problems that have led us to this debt crisis in some parts of the Eurozone, which we need to address very, very quickly.
Now, the point here that in his phone conversation with Sarkozy and Merkel this week, Mr. Papandreou, the Greek PM, promised, quote, to deliver his austerity package. Can he do that in the face of strong street protests, etc.?
The Greek economy and the Greek society are indeed on breaking point. The austerity measures are extremely hard, and they are targeting those that are less able to take them. Unfortunately, there is a necessity to reduce the debt, and the medicine right now applied is very possible that will kill the patient at the same time as healing him.
And what about Eurobonds? Can they help? I mean, there's a great division of opinion about them, obviously.
They can be quite helpful in the medium and long term. In the short term, they can allow member states to borrow in the markets cheaply, but they're not the only recipe that will solve the situation.
But because of their power, financial power, doesn't Germany have an effective veto on something like that?
They do indeed, and they're very concerned that adopting Eurobonds will increase their own borrowing costs. But I think it's a mistake to rule it out completely, and that's what has made the market so nervous, the ideological rejection of a possibility.
And last time we talked, you were pretty confident that you insisted that the Greeks would not default and will stay in the euro. Are you as confident today as you were then?
I'm definitely confident about the second part of that statement. Greece will stay in the euro because the political will is there, both from the Greeks and their eurozone partners. As far as the default is concerned, we have seen efforts to restructure the debt and make sure that the private sector takes some of the pain that the Greek people are currently taking, because in many ways they were responsible for the excessive borrowing that took place. As long as that is done in an orderly fashion, we won't have a default. We will have a restructuring, and Greek debt will be paid off slowly in a longer period of time, and a small haircut might be applied as well. But that doesn't qualify as a default.
And the Polish Foreign Minister said Europe is in danger. If the euro area breaks up, the European Union will not be able to survive.
Politicians have a flair for poetry, and I wouldn't put it in such post-apocalyptic terms.
You wouldn't?
I wouldn't. We are faced with serious issues, and I think they're trying to put pressure on national parliaments to adopt the necessary measures quicker rather than slower. But I wouldn't put it in those damaging terms.
But I mean, are we going to have a situation where there's another crisis like the recent one in Greece, which was the second in that series? Will there be a third crisis in the series about Greece? A fourth? I mean, when is anyone going to heal the Eurozone? It's probably impossible.
Once we put in place the necessary firepower to, on the one hand, protect all the solvent countries, and on the other hand, recapitalize the European banks, because a lot of the problem starts from there. The financial markets don't have confidence in the banking sector in Europe to be able to withstand the potential default. And that lack of confidence is leading to panic. And when panic takes over in the financial markets, money gets drawn out and self-fulfilling prophecies take place. So European leaders need to put in place enough money into this financial stability mechanism they have put together to assure the markets that they can defend ailing Eurozone member states and at the same time recapitalize the banks that are in slight trouble still.
So will Greece need a third bailout?
Indeed. Well, it won't be able to go back to the markets anytime soon. Up until 2012, it will definitely need to be shored up by its international partners. But I would like to make one point. It's not a bailout, it's a loan. Greeks are required to pay this back. This is not a grant, and it's important to make that clear for our viewers across Europe. They're not necessarily bailing out Greece, they're helping it in a difficult time. They will be paid back with an interest as well.
With interest as well? And that's a pledge from the Greek government, backed by whom?
Well, the Greek people and the parliament, and of course its European partners. And that's
the European partners too were absolutely crucial in this too.
Indeed, indeed.
Thank you very much
for
being with us again. I hope we welcome you back in a situation which is not a third loan or a third bailout, whatever. And thank you very much for being with us. And in a moment, we're joined by Oscar-winning movie star, this year's Oscar winner, Colin Firth, after this short break.